Hello everyone, I am Mr. Night Truth. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and let's go down into the story.
The rain had begun hours before sunset, drumming against the crooked roof of the small house on Alder Street. Inside, Elena Rivera tried to calm her son, Daniel, who hated storms. She had raised him alone for 6 years, her strength and weariness woven into every line on her face. Neighbors knew her as kind, but private. A woman who worked long hours and came home to the boy who was her entire world. Few knew of the men who sometimes parked outside her house, headlights lingering too long in the dark. That night, Elena closed the curtains quickly, as if shutting out more than the storm. Daniel clutched his toy car, whispering, "Mommy, don't let the lights come in." She hushed him, her smile forced, her eyes darting toward the door. She had secrets she never spoke aloud, secrets that had begun to weigh heavily in the weeks before her death. At 9:42 p.m., neighbors heard a sharp crash, then silence. One later told police she thought she heard Eleanor scream, though the storm made everything uncertain. The next morning, officers forced open the swollen front door. The living room bore signs of struggle, an overturned lamp, glass scattered across the floor. In the bedroom, Eleanor lay still, her blouse torn, a deep wound staining the sheets crimson. Daniel's small bed was empty, his blanket tossed aside as though he had been pulled from it mid-dream. Detective Howard was the first to speak. "She didn't go quietly," he muttered, scanning the broken frame of the window. The boy's absence chilled him more than the body itself. "They took the kid," another officer whispered. "But why leave her like this?" For weeks, police scoured the town. Posters of Daniel's face appeared on lampposts, wet with rain. Search parties combed the woods, while reporters asked endless questions. Was this revenge? A crime of passion? Had Elena been hiding something? Theories spread faster than evidence. Some pointed to a man she had once been seen arguing with outside a diner. Others whispered about a forbidden affair with someone untouchable. But no body of a child was found. No ransom note delivered. Slowly, the search dwindled. The murder was stamped unsolved, the kidnapping abduction by unknown subject. The case, file thickened with dead ends until it was shoved into the back of a metal cabinet, collecting dust. Yet the memory lingered. Neighbors would pass the empty house and lower their voices. Children dared each other to touch its gate. Every storm seemed to bring the echo of that scream. Elena's death became a ghost story, her son a symbol of innocence swallowed by darkness. 18 years would pass before his name surfaced again, not as a victim, but as the only one who could uncover what truly happened that night. The man in the mirror was 24 years old, but inside, Daniel Rivera carried a 6-year-old boy's unfinished scream. He had been told his name was Ethan Cole, raised in another town under another story. His childhood was a series of shifting explanations. His parents had died, then they hadn't. He had been adopted, then he hadn't. The lies were fed carefully, spooned into him like medicine meant to numb questions. But questions had a way of resurfacing. It began with dreams. A woman's voice crying his name through thunder. A red stain spreading across white sheets. The flash of a shadow crossing. A doorway. He would wake trembling, hands pressed to his face as if shielding himself from something unseen. For years, he believed the visions were inventions of a frightened child. But as he grew older, the dreams sharpened, and the woman's voice felt less like fantasy and more like memory. One evening, he confronted the woman who had raised him. Margaret Cole had always been distant, her affection mechanical, her discipline severe. At the kitchen table, Daniel's voice shook as he asked, "Why do I remember a different house, a different name?" Why do I remember her? Margaret froze, her spoon clattering into the bowl. Dreams don't mean truth, she said firmly. Forget them. You are Ethan. That's all that matters. But something in her eyes, panic, not love, told him otherwise. In the weeks that followed, Daniel dug through the locked drawers and dusty boxes in the attic. He found fragments. An old photograph of himself at 4, standing beside a woman, with kind eyes. The edges of the picture had been torn, as if someone wanted her erased. Beneath the photo, a faded flyer. His own face printed under the words, "Missing Child." His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped it. The truth, long buried, cracked open inside him. He wasn't Ethan. He was Daniel. And the woman he saw in his dreams had been real. His mother. The memories attacked him after that, sharper, less merciful. The storm, the scream. The man's hand gripping his arm, dragging him into darkness. He couldn't see the face, but he remembered the smell of cologne, the scrape of a ring against his skin. He remembered wanting to cry out, and the final sight of his mother's eyes, terrified, pleading, as the door slammed between them. Haunted, Daniel searched for records. Police archives confirmed what he feared. Elena Rivera, murdered in her home. Her son vanished without a trace. The file labelled, him presumed dead. He stared at the words, bile rising in his throat. In a dimly lit diner, he met with an old neighbour who had known his mother. The man leaned across the table, lowering his voice. Elena was in trouble before she died. She was seeing someone she shouldn't. A man with power, money. People said she tried to end it, but he wouldn't let her. That night, I think she paid the price. Daniel's knuckles whitened against the glass of water. Who was he? The man shook his head. Some secrets don't stay hidden without reason. You keep digging, son, you'll find out, but you might not like what you find. Daniel walked out into the night, the cold air burning his lungs. For 18 years, silence had buried his mother's truth. Now he knew. Someone had stolen not only her life, but his identity. Someone had profited from her silence. And if his memories were right, that same someone had dragged him into the dark. As he stood under the streetlight, he felt the storm inside him gathering strength. He would not run from it anymore. He would find the man in his memories, the shadow that had haunted his nights. And when he did, the truth would no longer stay buried. The deeper Daniel dug, the less the world resembled the one he thought he knew. His nights were consumed by archives, his days by following trails of whispers. The photograph he had found of his mother became a compass, her eyes pleading for him not to stop until the truth was unearthed. In dusty courthouse records, he discovered her name scrawled in connection to a man with wealth and political influence, Richard Hale. A respected figure now, but back then, a married man who had everything to lose if his affair with Elena surfaced. Neighbours had hinted at it, but the files revealed more. Late-night calls traced to his number, anonymous checks deposited into Elena's account, and a statement withdrawn weeks before her death, as if she had threatened to expose him. The betrayal cut deeper when Daniel uncovered who had helped bury it. His Aunt Rosa, the woman he once believed would have fought for him, had signed a statement declaring Eleanor unstable, unfit, hinting that she might have run off with her child. That lie had bought silence, shielding Richard Hale from suspicion. Daniel's memories surged in sharper detail. The storm, the broken glass, his mother's desperate cry as she reached for him, and then the hand dragging him away, the ring glinting under the flicker of lightning, a heavy band with a family crest etched deep into the metal. He had seen that same crest before, on the cover of a magazine article about Richard Hale's rise to prominence. His stomach twisted. The man who stole him from his bed was the same man who had his mother silenced. That night, Daniel confronted Rosa. She lived in a cramped apartment now, the years having drained her of the elegance she once paraded. He entered without warmth, his voice trembling with rage. "Why did you lie?" he demanded. slamming the old flyer of his missing face onto her table. "Why did you protect him?" Her eyes widened, then dropped. For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, her voice cracked. "Because he owned us. Your mother thought love could change him. She didn't see what he was capable of. When she threatened to expose him, he came to me. He said if I stayed quiet, he'd make sure I never went hungry again. Daniel's fists clenched. "So you traded her life and mine." Tears welled in her eyes, but guilt had calcified into something permanent. "I thought you were dead. I thought maybe it was better that way." The words pierced deeper than any blade. He staggered back, the walls pressing in around him. When he left her apartment, the city lights blurred through his tears. Every step was heavier, as though he were walking through quicksand. But within the pain, clarity sharpened. Richard Hale had orchestrated everything. The affair, the murder, the kidnapping. He had stolen not just a life, but two. Daniel's dreams tormented him that night with cruel precision. He saw his mother again, her hair damp from rain, her eyes wild with fear. She mouthed his name as the shadow dragged him away. He woke with the memory burned into him. Hale's voice in his ear, calm and steady, promising, "You'll forget all of this." But Daniel hadn't forgotten. Not anymore. The truth was no longer buried. It was alive, burning inside him, demanding retribution. As dawn broke, Daniel packed the evidence he had gathered, the photograph, the records, the flyer, and now Rosa's half-confession. He looked at them not as relics of pain, but as weapons. The storm that had begun 18 years ago was finally circling back, and this time it would not end in silence. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with the hum of expectation. Richard Hale sat at the defense table, his silver hair combed neatly, his suit immaculate. He looked less like a murderer and more like the man the city had trusted for decades, a philanthropist, a politician, a figure of power. But Daniel knew the truth behind the polished mask. The evidence was laid bare, the phone records, the secret checks, the photograph, the missing child flyer. Rosa's trembling testimony was the final crack in Hale's fortress. Her voice shook as she admitted the lie she had signed 18 years earlier. Gasps rippled through the room, but Hale sat rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Daniel. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he rose slowly, the weight of his past pressing down on every step. His voice was steady, but laced with pain. "For 18 years, I was told I didn't exist, but I remember. I remember my mother's scream. I remember the ring on his hand as he dragged me away. You didn't just kill her, you tried to erase me too. But I'm still here, and I will not be silent." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Hale's attorneys shifted uncomfortably. The mask of power finally cracked when the judge read the verdict. Guilty. Justice, at last. But it did not feel clean. Daniel did not feel whole. The scars were too deep, the betrayals too personal. The law had spoken, but the boy inside him still heard his mother's cry every time he closed his eyes. Days later, Daniel stood in the cemetery, the wind brushing through the tall grass. His mother's grave was simple, the stone worn by rain. In his hand, he held the small toy car he had clutched the night she died, the one taken from him and hidden away for years. He placed it gently on the cold stone. His voice broke as he whispered, "I found him, Mum. I found the truth. I just wish it could bring you back." The sky darkened with distant thunder, echoing the night he had lost everything. But this time, he didn't flinch. He stood tall, the storm behind him, and walked away in silence. The past was no longer buried, but its cost would remain with him forever. A small town where secrets had long memories. People still spoke in hushed tones about the parks, not because of what they had done themselves, but because of the son who had carried their name into infamy. Jae-hoon Park, once hailed as a financial prodigy, had grown into one of Korea's most notorious stock scammers. His schemes drained the savings of retirees, small business owners, and hopeful families. He left behind nothing but shattered lives and the bitter taste of betrayal. But in Onyang, his parents remained. Mr. Park, a former factory supervisor, and Mrs. Park, a quiet homemaker, stayed in their aging house with its paint peeling at the edges and garden left untended. They lived modestly, almost as if shrinking from sight. But whispers followed them everywhere. Neighbors said they must have known. Others claimed the scammers' money flowed through their hands too. On a cold evening, Mrs. Park overheard two women outside the market. They can say they're innocent all they want, but how does a man like that rise without help? One whispered. The other scoffed. You think the parents didn't enjoy the money? Look at that new refrigerator they got. That doesn't come from pensions. Mrs. Park turned away, her hands trembling, the vegetables slipping from her bag. She never defended herself, never shouted back. Silence became her shield, though it cut her deeper than words. Inside the Park home, arguments had grown sharper. They blame us for everything, Mrs. Park said one night, her voice brittle. Mr. Park sat at the kitchen table staring at unpaid bills. We raised him, but we didn't control him. He made his choices. Her eyes filled with tears. And now we pay the price for them. Theirs was a life lived under constant suspicion. A knock at the door could mean another creditor demanding answers, or a victim spitting accusations. Though the Parks insisted they had severed ties with Jae-hoon, no one believed them. To the world, they were complicit. To themselves, they were prisoners of their son's legacy. The last time anyone saw them was on a damp Tuesday evening. Mr. Park was seen walking home from a hardware shop, carrying a bag of nails and light bulbs. Mrs. Park was at the corner bakery, buying red bean bread she always favoured. Both seemed weary, but ordinary. They returned to their house at dusk. The lights flickered on. By morning, the home was silent. By nightfall, it was empty. Neighbours noticed the stillness first. The curtains stayed drawn. The small dog that barked at every passerby was quiet. Days passed, and rumours filled the void. Had victims of Jae-hoon's fraud come for revenge? Had the parents fled to join their disgraced son abroad? Or had something darker crept behind their locked doors? Detective Choi, newly assigned to Onyang, stood outside the Park residence on the 5th day of silence. The windows reflected nothing but his own frown. He pushed open the rusty gate, its creak loud in the winter air. The house seemed to hold, its breath, as if it already knew the questions he carried inside. The legacy of greed had not only stained Jae-hoon's name, but cast a shadow over his parents' lives. Now, with their sudden disappearance, that shadow threatened to grow darker still. And soon, the first signs of blood would appear. The Park residence remained sealed off for nearly 3 weeks after the couple's disappearance. The town buzzed, with theories, each darker than the last. To some, it was simple revenge, victims of Jae-hoon's financial ruin finally claiming blood. To others, the Parks had orchestrated their own vanishing act, retreating to a secret life built on hidden money. When detectives re-entered the home with forensic teams, the silence inside was almost unbearable. Dust had settled on untouched furniture, a calendar on the wall still marking the day they vanished. But in the kitchen, where Mrs. Park once kneaded dough for her modest meals, something caught the light. A faint reddish smear trailed along the cabinet handle. Another faint blot darkened the corner of the linoleum floor. Tests confirmed it. Blood. Enough to suggest violence had occurred, but not enough to conclude death. It was the first tangible evidence, yet it only raised more questions. Detective Choi stood staring at the stain, his jaw tight. This wasn't just abandonment, he muttered. Something happened here. The discovery sent shockwaves through Onyang. At the marketplace, whispers turned into pointed accusations. The victims found them, one man said near the butcher's stall, made them pay the price. Another woman shook her head. Or maybe they ran. Blood doesn't always mean death. But beneath the gossip, investigators uncovered a more troubling truth. Bank records showed that long after Jae-hoon's arrest, deposits had trickled steadily into the park's accounts. Small amounts, carefully spread across different banks, but unmistakable in their origin. It was money from the fraud, laundered and redirected. When confronted with the evidence, the park's relatives, once sympathetic, turned cold. At a family gathering, Detective Choi sat with Jae-hoon's cousin, Min-soo. So they lied to us all this time, Min-soo spat, slamming his fist against the table. They looked us in the eye, told us they lived only on pensions, and all the while they were eating with the same money that destroyed others. His wife added bitterly, if that's true, they deserved what came for them. But Choi was not convinced. The pattern of the deposits suggested someone else controlled the flow. Perhaps the parks were complicit. Perhaps they were coerced. Either way, it meant someone close enough to Jae-hoon had kept the chain alive. The investigation widened. Victims were questioned, their anger palpable. Some admitted they had dreamed of vengeance, but swore they had no part in the couple's disappearance. Others claimed the parks had taunted them with veiled arrogance, flaunting hidden wealth. None of it could be proved. Inside the park home, more clues emerged. A receipt tucked into a drawer showed a recent purchase of a refrigerator and wall cabinet, items that matched gossip around town. But no such furniture was found inside the house. Had it been delivered elsewhere? Or had someone removed it after the couple vanished? Theories collided, but one stood out. Among the park's few remaining friends was their nephew, Ji-ho, a quiet man in his 30s who had lived only a few blocks away. He had visited often, even defended his aunt and uncle when others accused them, but his name appeared linked to one of the bank accounts funneling money. When investigators questioned him, Ji-ho's composure cracked. They didn't know, he said sharply, sweat beading at his forehead. They were just trying to survive. You think they had any control over Jae-hoon? Over me? Choi leaned forward. So you admit you handled the money? A pause. Ji-ho's voice dropped to a whisper. I had no choice. If I stopped, he would have come for me too. The implication was chilling. Jae-hoon, even behind bars, still cast his shadow over the family. But Choi left the interrogation unsettled. Ji-ho's story explained the money, but not the blood in the kitchen. And not the silence that now filled the park home. Something more, sinister, lurked beneath. As Choi stepped outside into the winter dusk, the cold air burned his lungs. The neighborhood lights flickered one by one, and the park residence stood dark, its curtains swaying in the draft of a broken window latch. For the first time, Choi felt certain. The parks had not simply disappeared. They had been swallowed by the very fraud that once made their son infamous. And in the shadows of Onyang, someone who knew them best was hiding the truth. The winter chill of Onyang seemed sharper the day the delivery records were re-examined. A paper trail led investigators to a small warehouse on the outskirts of town, where a refrigerator and a wall cabinet, both purchased weeks before the park's disappearance, had been redirected. The delivery driver, nervous and pale, confirmed he had dropped them at the park residence late one evening. Strange thing, he told detectives, his eyes darting toward the floor. The old man wouldn't let me inside, just said, leave, it by the back gate. I thought it odd, but I didn't ask questions. That clue was enough to warrant a deeper search. When investigators returned to the park home with cadaver dogs and demolition tools, dread hung thick in the air. The refrigerator, shoved into the corner of the kitchen, hummed faintly. Its plug dangled loose, as if deliberately disconnected. When the seal was broken, a suffocating odor spilled out, forcing even seasoned detectives to gag. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic, lay the body of Mr. Park. His limbs had been crudely separated, as if his killer had struggled against time or sanity. Minutes later, a hammer struck against the wall cabinet in the couple's bedroom. The wood splintered open to reveal a hollow cavity, Within the suffocating dark, investigators uncovered Mrs. Park. Her body folded unnaturally, her face frozen in a silent scream. News of the discovery spread across South Korea within hours. Broadcasters described it as a murder drenched in grotesque symbolism. The father entombed in cold machinery, the mother walled away as if erased from memory. The nation, already haunted by the Park family name, now trembled with outrage and horror. Detective Choi stood outside the crime scene, cigarette shaking in his hand. "This wasn't revenge," he whispered to a colleague. "This was personal." The brutality pointed not to strangers but to someone intimate with the Park's lives and fears. Every cut, every concealment felt less like rage and more like punishment, an execution designed to degrade, not just destroy. The investigation narrowed quickly. Ji-ho, the nephew, had connections to the bank accounts, but the violence didn't match his hesitant, almost cowardly demeanor. Then a name surfaced from old family records. Daniel Kang. Daniel was the half-brother of Jae-hoon, born of Mr. Park's affair decades earlier. While Jae-hoon was groomed as the golden son, Daniel lived in obscurity, raised by a mother abandoned and humiliated by Mr. Park. Bitter and impoverished, Daniel had watched from the margins as the Park family flaunted respectability. Neighbors recalled seeing him lurking near the residence in recent months, his eyes hard, his words sharp. One woman remembered him muttering, "They all think they're innocent, but rot always begins at the root." When police brought Daniel in for questioning, he didn't flinch at the photographs of the refrigerator or the wall cabinet. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his voice low, deliberate. "You think victims did this? No. Victims wanted their money. I wanted justice." Detective Choi's voice tightened. "Justice? By butchering your father and stepmother." Daniel's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Greed is a disease. My mother died with nothing because of him. And then I learned they weren't just complicit. They fed on the fraud. Every deposit, every lie, they lived off it. Tell me, what sentence does the law give for that?" His words hung heavy in the interrogation room. It was not an admission, but it was not a denial either. For the first time, the investigation revealed the hidden fractures of the Park family. Beneath the polished surface of their respectability was a legacy of betrayal. Fathers abandoning children, mothers silenced, sons turned predators, and wealth built on ruin. Yet, as damning as Daniel's bitterness sounded, detectives hesitated. Could one man, fueled by vengeance, execute such a meticulous crime alone? Or had someone else, perhaps even Ji-ho, helped carry out the grisly concealment? As the questions deepened, one truth settled uncomfortably. The Parks had not been random victims of Jae-hoon's sins. Their murder was the price of a family's fraud, collected by blood and blade. The case was no longer just about a missing couple. It had become a reckoning of generations, one that was far from over. The courtroom was silent as Daniel Kang took the stand, his wrists bound in steel, his eyes steady and unblinking. The grisly images of the refrigerator and wall cabinet had already seared themselves into the jury's mind, but it was Daniel's voice, measured, almost calm, that cut deepest. "They weren't innocent," he began, glancing toward the black and white photographs of Mr. and Mrs. Park projected on the screen. "My father abandoned my mother, left us starving while he built a new life. But even then, I thought the Parks were just cruel. Later, I learned they were worse, partners in their son's crimes. Everyone he stole, they washed it clean. They ate from the same table built on ruin." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Prosecutors laid out evidence that confirmed his words. The steady stream of deposits into the Parks' accounts, luxury purchases made under their names, and coded messages, exchanged with Jae-hoon that revealed complicity rather than ignorance. The Parks were not passive victims. They had been active participants in laundering millions. But Daniel's confession went beyond cold fact. His words burned with the fury of a child betrayed. "Do you know what it's like? he said, voice breaking for the first time. To watch your mother cough herself to death because no hospital would take her without money, while your father dined on stolen wealth. Do you know what it's like to carry their name like a curse? The judge leaned forward, stone-faced. The defense argued that Daniel's rage blinded him, that his crimes could not be excused by pain. Yet even the prosecutors, hardened by years of cases, admitted this was no simple act of murder. It was a reckoning. When the verdict came, guilty of double homicide, Daniel closed his eyes, almost relieved. He would serve life behind bars. But for many watching, the true weight of the trial was not the punishment of a murderer, but the exposure of the Parks themselves. Were they victims of their son's sins, or perpetrators who had finally paid the price? The question lingered long after the gavel struck. Outside the courthouse, the wind carried the whispers of Onyang, a town forever haunted by the truth that greed does not end with one generation. It seeps like blood, staining every name it touches, and sometimes it demands payment. The morning began like any other in Jinan. Vendors set up their stalls, steam from street food carts mingled with the crisp air, and office workers rushed past the district government building, clutching briefcases and paper cups of coffee. No one paid attention to the black sedan pulling into the curb, until the earth itself seemed to tear open. A thunderous roar shattered the calm. Fire swallowed the car, shattering windows of nearby shops and sending terrified pedestrians diving for cover. Within seconds, the once busy street transformed into a scene of carnage. Twisted metal, glass shards glittering across the pavement, the acrid stench of burning fuel choking the air. Sirens wailed, bystanders screamed. Amid the chaos, whispers spread quickly. It's Park Sung-min, the official. He's dead. Investigators arrived almost immediately, pushing through panicked crowds. Park Sung-min was not just another civil servant. He was a senior official, praised for his tireless dedication to public service. For years, he had been the polished face of local development projects, the man whose smile appeared on campaign posters, shaking hands with community leaders. Now, his charred remains lay in a car that had become his coffin. Detective Choi Min-soo, a hardened investigator in his early 40s, surveyed the wreckage. His face was expressionless, but his clenched jaw betrayed unease. Military precision, he muttered, crouching beside what was left of the vehicle. This wasn't just a warning. This was an execution. His partner, Rookie Officer Han Ye-rin, swallowed hard. "Sir, are we looking at political retaliation?" Choi's eyes narrowed as he scanned the crowd. Some bystanders filmed with shaking hands, their voices rising above the chaos. Others whispered names of rival politicians, enemies who might want Sung-min out of the way. It was the simplest explanation. And in cases like these, the simplest explanations rarely held. Later that evening, news anchors delivered grim reports to millions of households. A shocking car bombing has claimed the life of senior government. Official Park Sung-min in Jinan earlier today. Authorities suspect political motives, but no group has yet claimed responsibility. Behind the polished newsroom delivery, the city buzzed with rumors. Some whispered about foreign agents, others about business rivals. But one thread kept resurfacing, like a stubborn stain: Sung-min's private life. At a dimly lit bar, two men spoke in hushed voices. "You think it was the mayor's enemies?" one asked, eyes darting nervously. The other shook his head. "Enemies, sure, but not the kind you're thinking of. He wasn't the saint everyone thought he was. Heard he had a mistress, young, pretty, trouble." The first man frowned. "A woman? That doesn't explain a bomb." "Doesn't it?" The second leaned closer. "You betray the wrong person and suddenly the whole city burns." Detective Choi scribbled in his notebook that night. Political retaliation, corruption, affair. Each word felt heavier than the last. Sung-min's financial records revealed minor inconsistencies, nothing dramatic, but enough to suggest hidden channels, accounts that shouldn't exist. deposits that didn't match his salary. Choi stared at the numbers until his vision blurred. He muttered to himself, enemies everywhere. But the knife often comes from the one sitting closest. The following day, flowers and framed photographs piled up outside the municipal office, mourners bowing their heads in silence. Yet behind their grief lingered something darker, suspicion. Was Park Sung-min a martyr felled by corruption, or a hypocrite caught in his own web? Officer Han, watching the crowd, whispered, "Sir, if the whispers are true, we're not chasing political rivals. We're chasing his secrets." Choi didn't answer immediately. He looked at the shrine of flowers, the faces of Sung-min's colleagues, the flicker of cameras capturing every tear. Finally, he said quietly, "Secrets have a way of surviving the dead, and this man left more than anyone can count." As the city mourned, another figure stepped silently into the narrative. A woman with dark hair and a quiet gaze, clutching a worn leather diary close to her chest. She lingered on the edge of the crowd, unseen by most, her expression unreadable. Her name was Lee Ji-yeon, and soon her shadow would eclipse the legacy of the man everyone thought they knew. The crowd outside the municipal office slowly thinned, mourners leaving behind wilting flowers and smoke from guttering candles. Yet amid the grief, Detective Choi Min-soo's eyes had tracked a single figure slipping away, a young woman with dark hair, clutching something tightly to her chest. She hadn't approached the shrine, hadn't bowed, hadn't wept. She had simply watched and disappeared into the night. That image clung to him. When he returned to headquarters, it refused to fade. Days later, whispers gave the shadow a name, Lee Ji-yeon, 29 years old, former hotel receptionist, no criminal record, no political affiliations. But she was tied to Park Sung-min in ways that could no longer be ignored. A photograph emerged, Ji-yeon beside Sung-min at a seaside villa, their hands brushing almost imperceptibly. Her presence was quiet but undeniable. "Why wasn't she at the funeral?" Officer Han asked as they pinned her picture to the evidence board. "Because," Choi replied grimly, "mistresses don't get invited to funerals." The first break came when Ji-yeon's apartment was searched. The space was immaculate, almost sterile, as though someone had wiped it clean of her existence. Drawers empty, photographs gone, closets bare. But tucked behind a loose floorboard, the officers uncovered a battered leather diary, its pages dense with her looping handwriting. The diary was a revelation. It didn't merely confirm the affair, it documented it in detail. Clandestine hotel, meetings, cash envelopes exchanged late at night, hushed arguments about promises Sung-min had made but never kept. Ji-yeon had written about shady construction contracts funneled through shell companies, about offshore accounts Sung-min swore she'd never see. One line chilled Choi as he read it aloud in the quiet evidence room. "If he thinks he can erase me like a signature on paper, he underestimates the things I know. If he leaves me with nothing, I will leave him with ashes." The revelation split the case wide open. Sung-min was no longer just a public servant turned victim. He was a man living a double life, funding luxury through corruption and silencing the woman who threatened to expose him. But then came the twist that unsettled even hardened investigators. Ji-yeon herself had vanished. Neighbors hadn't seen her in days. Her phone was disconnected. Security footage from her building showed her leaving one night with a suitcase and never returning. Runaway, Han speculated. Choi shook his head. Or silenced. The question is, did someone silence her, or did she silence him? The media caught wind of the mistress, and the narrative of mourning shifted. Commentators spoke in sharp tones now. The explosion may not have been political at all. The once glowing image of Park Sung-min was unraveling before the nation's eyes. Family members, dragged reluctantly into the scandal, began to fracture under the weight of exposure. Sung-min's widow accused his brother of knowing about the affair. His brother retaliated, suggesting she had tolerated it for financial security. At one heated family interview, Choi watched the mask of respectability collapse. You knew about her, the widow hissed, voice trembling with rage. Her brother-in-law spat back. We all knew. You chose not to care, as long as the money kept coming in. Their voices cracked like gunfire across the interrogation room, leaving behind silence, heavy with bitterness. Meanwhile, Choi sat in his office, the diary spread before him. His eyes lingered on the final entries. Frantic handwriting, ink smudged as though written in haste. He promised me safety, but promises are paper, and fire burns paper to dust. I have nothing left but this truth. If I disappear, the truth should not die with me. Choi muttered to himself, disappear, or make him disappear. The line echoed in his head long after the lights went out. A week after Ji-yeon's disappearance, a taxi driver came forward. He remembered a woman matching her description. She had been pale, silent, clutching that same leather diary as if her life depended on it. Her destination, the outskirts of Jinan, near an abandoned factory once tied to government contracts. Choi and Han drove there at dawn. Mist coiled around rusting gates, shattered windows gaped like hollow eyes, and the smell of oil and rot lingered in the air. Han whispered, uneasy. Why here? Choi answered without looking at him. Because secrets don't stay buried in offices. They're hidden where no one dares to look. They stepped inside, the echo of their footsteps magnified in the cavernous dark. And then they saw it, spray-painted in crude red letters across the crumbling wall. Ashes remain. Choi froze. Ji-yeon's words from the diary carved themselves back into his mind. Ashes. Ashes. If he leaves me with nothing, I will leave him with ashes. The abandoned factory no longer felt empty. It felt like a graveyard waiting to be unearthed. The graffiti still echoed in Detective Choi's mind. Ashes remain. But the factory yielded no body, no trace of Ji-yeon. Instead, what the forensic team uncovered in the rubble of Sung Min's car shifted the entire direction of the case. The bomb had not been crude. It wasn't built in a garage or pieced together by an amateur with rage in his heart. It was precise, deliberate, and devastating. Military-grade C4, laced with TNT. Whoever planted it had access to resources far beyond a scorned mistress or a grieving widow. When the report landed on Choi's desk, his partner Han exhaled sharply. This isn't just a lover's quarrel. This is a declaration of war. Choi tapped the page. Military stock, restricted. Only those in high places could touch this. That means politicians, contractors, maybe even the army. Or someone they sold it to, Han muttered. The circle of suspicion widened overnight. Sung Min's political rivals, long humiliated by his rise, suddenly looked more dangerous. Contracts he had won were linked to companies whose leaders had everything to gain from his death. Yet, as the detectives sifted through testimony, a darker portrait of Sung Min emerged. Ji-yeon's friends came forward reluctantly, voices low, as if afraid the dead man could still retaliate. One revealed a secret dinner where Ji-yeon confided her fears. He told her she'd always be safe, the friend whispered. He said he had connections, that nobody would dare touch her because he would protect her. Choi leaned in. And did he? The woman's eyes glistened. She laughed when she said it. Protection, she called it, like a promise, written on sand. She didn't believe him anymore. Her words fit too perfectly with the diary entries, with Ji-yeon's looming disappearance. The investigation fractured into two competing truths. On one side, the possibility that Sung Min was murdered by powerful rivals who wanted him silenced. On the other, Ji-yeon, armed with secrets, perhaps betrayed, and driven to orchestrate the one act that would guarantee he never betrayed her again. Choi stared at the evidence board late into the night. Pictures of Sung Min, Ji-yeon, the family, the bomb fragments, the diary pages, all connected by threads of red yarn. He whispered to himself, who was the real victim here? The next morning, new financial records arrived. Hidden bank transfers revealed Sung Min had siphoned millions from city funds into shell accounts. Some payments coincided with weapons shipments routed through private contractors. Explosives, guns, supplies. Han's face paled as he scanned the pages. Are we saying he funded the very bomb that killed him? Choi didn't answer. The silence was louder than words. The official narrative, respected public servant assassinated by rivals, was crumbling. In its place, a tangled reality emerged. Sung Min had built his empire on corruption, lied to his mistress, betrayed his promises, and perhaps sowed the seeds of his own destruction. And as the lines blurred between victim and perpetrator, Choi realized something chilling. If Ji-yeon was alive, she now held the power to bring the entire government crashing down. The courtroom buzzed like a hive, 100 voices rising and falling under the echo of polished wood and flickering fluorescent lights. Reporters packed the aisles, cameras clicking, as the trial that had transfixed the nation neared its climax. Detective Choi sat rigid in the witness chair, his testimony heavy with months of investigation. He laid out the evidence, the explosives, traced to military contractors, the hidden bank transfers, the testimony from Ji-yeon's friends. Each revelation chipped away at the myth of Park Sung-min, the man once hailed as Jinan's golden official. The defense argued Sung-min had been targeted by rivals, but the prosecution painted a darker picture. Not rivals, not enemies, but allies. Allies who had fattened themselves on his corruption, who knew his mistress threatened to unravel it all. The courtroom fell into silence when the prosecutor announced Lee Ji-yeon planned to testify. She had evidence, documents, recordings. But before her truth could see daylight, Sung Min's own allies decided he was a liability. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Choi felt his chest tighten. For months, suspicion had pointed toward Ji-yeon as the vengeful lover. Now the truth landed like a hammer. She had not orchestrated the blast. She had been silenced to keep their empire intact. On the fourth day of trial, a final blow shattered what little doubt remained. Forensic teams searching Sung Min's mountain villa unearthed a shallow grave beneath a collapsed shed. The remains were badly decomposed, but DNA confirmed what many had feared. Ji-yeon. A hush swept through the city. The mistress had never fled, never hidden. She had been buried like trash, discarded the moment she ceased being useful. Detective Han stood beside Choi when the report came in. His voice trembled. She tried to bring him down, and instead, they buried her. Choi stared at the file, bile rising in his throat. And they called her guilty. They made her a ghost before her body was even cold. In court, the discovery was damning. Sung Min's allies scrambled to distance themselves, but the evidence was relentless. Wire transfers, phone logs, encrypted messages tying them to the purchase of explosives and the disposal of Ji-yeon. The verdict came swiftly. Several officials were convicted of conspiracy, corruption, and murder. Their sentences varied, but none escaped the shadow of public disgrace. The administration crumbled overnight. Sung Min's funeral, once planned as a state affair, was reduced to a quiet guarded ceremony. Protesters lined the streets, holding signs that read "Murderer in death, traitor in life." Yet, for all the convictions, the ending felt hollow. Ji-yeon's name was cleared, but only in death. Her diary, her whispers, her desperate warnings, they had never reached the world in her own voice. Instead, it was men in suits who decided what fragments of her truth were worth hearing. Detective Choi walked past her grave weeks later. A simple headstone bore her name, flowers wilting in the summer heat. He placed a folded copy of her diary pages on the soil, a gesture more symbolic than official. He whispered, "You tried to tell the truth, and they buried it with you, maybe. All I've done is dig it up too late." The scandal left Jinan scarred, its trust in power eroded. Some called it justice, others a cover-up dressed in legal robes. The truth, like the smoke from Sung Min's exploded car, drifted upward, fading before it could be grasped. And in the end, one question lingered, haunting every headline, every whisper, every sleepless night for those who had watched it unfold. Was justice truly served, or was it just another life erased in the name of power? Epilogue. The silence that remains. The courtroom verdict marked the end of a trial that gripped the nation. Sung Min's allies were sentenced, their empire of corruption dismantled piece by piece. Newspapers declared it the downfall of a dynasty, yet beneath the headlines, another truth lingered in shadows. Lee Ji-yeon's body, unearthed from shallow earth near the villa, was laid to rest with little ceremony. To many, she was merely the mistress, a footnote in a scandal that toppled a politician. But in the pages of her diary, she was more. A woman who loved, a woman who feared, a woman who tried to speak before silence consumed her. The city of Jinan still carries the scar of the explosion, the street forever marked by blackened stone and memory. Citizens pass by, some whispering his name, others hers. In the end, the story is not just about the car bomb or the fall of power. It is about the lives caught in its blast, the lies buried, the voices silenced. Justice, in its official form, was delivered. But true justice, that remains uncertain, lingering like smoke after fire, leaving the haunting question unanswered. Who truly paid the price? The city of Suzhou lived in a rhythm of quiet routines, where neighbors knew the sound of each other's doors, and gossip carried faster than the morning news. When Kim Hye-jin stopped showing up at her job at a local clinic, people whispered, but no one raised an alarm. Suzhou was used to absences. People moved to bigger cities, chasing opportunities. But this absence was different. It stretched into weeks, and then months. Her husband, Choi Min-soo, eventually walked into the police station one humid afternoon, his shirt clinging with sweat, and filed a missing persons report. The detective who took it noted how flat his tone sounded. "She hasn't come home in maybe 3 weeks, or more," Min-soo muttered. "I thought she was staying with her sister, but she's not answering calls." The delay was impossible to ignore. 3 weeks was a lifetime for a missing woman, and already suspicion brewed around his statement. Neighbors remembered seeing Hye-jin only briefly before she vanished, shopping for groceries, watering the plants by the window. But what stood out more were Min-soo's live streams. He was a small-time gamer on a streaming platform, known for odd humor and self-deprecating jokes. During one late-night broadcast, a clip showed him laughing, his eyes red from drink. "My wife, she's always cold, colder than ice. Maybe she's hiding in the freezer." The chat filled with laughing emojis. No one thought twice at the time. Investigators began their slow dig into their marriage. Records revealed financial strain, unpaid business loans, a shuttered corner shop, and several gambling withdrawals. Hye-jin had covered rent for months with her savings. Friends described her as patient, always tired, and often covering for, say, her husband's failures. One friend, Seona, sat with detectives in the cafe where she and Hye-jin used to meet. She twisted her hands, speaking softly. "She told me she was going to leave him. She said she couldn't take the shouting anymore, the lies. But then she stopped messaging me, just vanished." Her eyes filled with tears. "Do you think he did something to her?" The detective only scribbled in silence, but the weight in the room answered for him. Descriptions of Min-soo's apartment painted a picture of absence, curtains half drawn against the sunlight, dust collecting on dishes, a faint odor lingering in the hallway, though at the time, no one traced it. Inside, his livestream equipment glowed bright against the darkness. Ring light, gaming chair, bottles of energy drink. On screen, he smiled, shouted at games, and joked with strangers online, all while his wife's whereabouts were unknown. To neighbors, it was chilling. The man who never reported her missing until weeks later was also the man who could laugh into a camera, convincing strangers that everything was fine. When police pressed Min-soo further, his answers shifted. She needed space. She told me she wanted to visit her family. Then, no, she went abroad for work. She mentioned China, or maybe Taiwan. And finally, frustration breaking through. Why do you keep asking me the same questions? She left me. Isn't that enough? The inconsistencies stacked like bricks in a wall, forming a shadow that loomed over his every word. By the end of the first week of investigation, the narrative was shifting. What began as a simple missing persons case was now tinted with dread. The whispers about Min-soo's livestream joke returned, hauntingly out of place. Hye-jin was not the kind of woman to disappear without a trace. Her paycheck was never collected, her ID card left behind. Somewhere in Suzhou, the truth of her vanishing lingered in silence, waiting to be uncovered. And in the faint hum of an unused refrigerator in Min-soo's garage, an answer lay hidden, though no one yet dared to look. Detectives didn't stumble upon the refrigerator by chance. It was the neighbors who complained first about the stench, a faint, sour odor that grew stronger whenever the summer heat pressed against Suzhou's narrow alleyways. One woman described it as rotting meat, thick and metallic. The trail led them to the garage of Choi Min-soo, where a large, outdated refrigerator hummed in the corner, its sides beaded with condensation. At first, Min-soo brushed it off. It's just old. The motor leaks. I keep pork in there for the shop, he explained, waving his hands nervously. But the detectives were unconvinced. A warrant was secured. The refrigerator, sealed with duct tape across its edges, was pried open. Inside lay Kim, Hye-jin. Her body was curled in on itself, wrapped in a thin blanket. Weeks of cold storage had frozen her expression in a permanent mask of silence, her hair stiff with frost. The officers recoiled. One stumbled outside, vomiting against the wall. The discovery tore through Suzhou like wildfire. The news channels seized on the horror, dubbing it instantly the Suzhou refrigerator murder. Anchors spoke in hushed tones. Neighbors appeared on camera, insisting they never imagined something so monstrous behind the garage door. Yet beneath the sensationalism, detectives pieced together a darker picture of premeditation. The refrigerator wasn't a random hiding place. Records revealed Min-soo had purchased extra duct tape, cleaning agents, and even a new padlock weeks before reporting her missing. Narration of his live streams took on chilling new meaning. The joke, "She's always cold, maybe she's hiding in the freezer," was no longer just gallows humor. It was prophecy wrapped in arrogance. During interrogation, Min-soo sat slouched, his voice teetering between denial and defiance. "I didn't kill her. She died on her own. She overdosed. I didn't know what to do." The detective leaned forward. "And you thought the right thing was to lock her in a refrigerator?" Min-soo's jaw clenched. "I panicked. No one would have believed me. Everyone thinks I'm a failure already. She wanted to leave me. She said she was done." The room fell heavy. The tape recorder captured every shallow breath, every excuse. Friends of Hye-jin, brought in for questioning, painted a tragic backdrop. She had been saving money quietly, planning to file for divorce. She confided in Seona that she feared Min-soo's temper. "He wasn't violent, not in the way you think," Seona explained, voice trembling. "It was worse. He made her feel invisible. She said she felt like a ghost in her own home." The description pierced through the investigation. Forensic reports confirmed there were no drugs in Hye-jin's system, no evidence of natural death. Instead, bruising around her neck told another story. She had been strangled. The apartment revealed more than Min-soo admitted. On his computer, detectives uncovered deleted searches. How long does a body last in a freezer? And can cold hide cause of death? His stream chat logs showed him joking days after her disappearance, playing to his small audience, all while Hye-jin's body lay chilling just meters away. The juxtaposition was unbearable. Digital laughter against the silence of death. Visuals of the crime scene remained etched in every officer's memory. The refrigerator door squeaking open, revealing frost curling like smoke around Hee-jin's form. Her pale hand, stiff and bent, resting against the blanket as if frozen mid-reach. The hum of the motor, mechanical and indifferent, preserving not life but decay. When confronted with the autopsy results, Min-soo cracked. His voice rose, desperate, almost childlike. "She was leaving. You don't understand. She was going to ruin me. She said she'd expose everything. The debts, the lies. I couldn't let her." His words hung in the interrogation room, raw and venomous. The mask of panic fell away, replaced by the naked confession of control. By the time the press caught wind of the confession, the narrative was complete. Min-soo was no longer the bumbling husband of a missing wife, but the calculated murderer who live-streamed jokes while his wife froze nearby. The people of Suzhou watched in horror as footage replayed on loop, him laughing at his screen, his words now echoing with sinister undertones. The investigation was no longer about finding Hee-jin. It was about unmasking Min-soo's performance, the dual life of a man who pretended to be harmless online while harboring the coldest of secrets in his garage. The chapter closed not with justice, but with a question. If Min-soo could joke about his wife's death while strangers laughed along, how much cruelty can hide behind a screen disguised as entertainment? The truth about the Suzhou refrigerator murder was not uncovered overnight. What the public saw was a shocking discovery and a swift confession. What lay beneath was a tangled web of 15 months of lies, built carefully, step by Choi Min-soo. From the day Kim Hae-jin vanished, Min-soo rehearsed his role as the grieving husband. He filed the missing persons report, but weeks late, explaining it with a shaky laugh. "She always went off when she was angry. I thought she'd be back. I didn't want to waste police time." The neighbors bought it. Her friends, uneasy, tried to believe it. But as the months stretched on, Min-soo leaned into the performance of innocence. He streamed more often, sitting before the dim glow of his monitor, cracking jokes to strangers. Sometimes he mentioned her absence, painting himself as a victim. "Guess it's just me now, boys. Maybe she found someone better." The chat responded with sympathy, some with teasing. Nobody guessed that in the garage behind him, Hee-jin lay, frozen, her silence the darkest punchline. Detectives later traced Min-soo's life during those months. The financial records told a damning story. He had taken loans under Hee-jin's name, funneled money into failed business ventures, and gambled online. When creditors came knocking, he deflected, weaving excuses. To them, Hee-jin was alive but away. Every conversation became part of his deception. A friend recalled a chilling encounter. I asked where she was. He just smiled and said, "She's chillin'." Literally. I thought he meant she was traveling. The joke landed differently once the refrigerator was opened. Cinematically, the trial revealed each piece like a puzzle snapping into place. Surveillance footage from hardware stores showed him buying duct tape and cleaning products. A neighbor testified about hearing a muffled argument, followed by silence, the night Hae-jin disappeared. Forensics confirmed fingerprints pressed against the inside of the refrigerator lid. Hers, a desperate attempt to push free. Each detail ripped away the mask Min-soo had so carefully worn. But what unsettled the courtroom most wasn't just the evidence, it was the coldness of his demeanor. Sitting at the defendant's table, he smirked at times, correcting prosecutors on minor details, as if playing another role. During cross-examination, the prosecutor leaned in. "Mr. Choi, you kept your wife's body in a refrigerator for over a year. You joked about her absence while strangers laughed online. Was this guilt or performance?" Min-soo shrugged, his words slicing through the silence. "People believe what entertains them. I gave them something to talk about." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It wasn't just murder, it was spectacle. Hee-jin's parents sat in the front row, their faces pale, grief carved deep into their skin. When a photograph of their daughter's frozen body was displayed, her mother broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The father, stone-faced, whispered only one word: monster. The weight of those 15 months pressed down on everyone in the room. This wasn't just a crime of passion or a moment of rage. It was a calculated erasure, a husband deciding his wife's voice would never be heard again. Journalists swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. Commentators dissected not just the crime, but the psychology. Some labeled him a narcissist, others a sociopath, but all agreed the live streams were his mask and the refrigerator his coffin for her truth. The final forensic report left no doubt. Kim Hye-jin's cause of death was manual strangulation. Her fingernails held traces of Min-soo's skin. His story of overdose collapsed under the weight of science. When the judge delivered his verdict, the courtroom held its breath. Choi Min-soo, you are found guilty of the murder of Kim Hye-jin. Your deception has compounded the cruelty of your crime. You are sentenced to life imprisonment. No cheers, no relief. Only the sound of Hye-jin's mother weeping into her hands and the heavy shuffle of Min-soo being led away. Outside, cameras captured the aftermath. The citizens of Suzhou carried a strange mix of emotions: anger, sorrow, and shame. They had laughed at his jokes, watched his streams, believed his lies. In some way, they had been part of his stage, unknowingly complicit in the performance. The 15 months of deceit became more than a headline. It became a haunting reminder of how easily a mask can hide horror. The chapter ended with an image. The refrigerator, now emptied, hauled away as evidence. Its door swung open under the harsh light, no longer hiding death, but standing as a silent monument to the darkness that had lived inside it. The trial was over, the sentence delivered. Yet in Suzhou, the weight of Kim Hye-jin's murder lingered, like a fog that refused to lift. On a quiet autumn morning, her family gathered in the hills outside the city for her burial. The coffin was small, too light, her remains reduced by 15 months of cold confinement. White chrysanthemums lined the path to the gravesite, each petal trembling in the crisp wind. Her mother clutched a framed photograph, Hee-jin's smiling face frozen in time, her tears falling onto the glass. Narration wrapped the scene in a solemn hush. Justice had been pronounced in a courtroom. But for those who loved her, there could never be enough years in a prison cell to balance the scales. Friends and neighbors attended in silence, their expressions heavy with guilt. Many had watched Choi Min-soo's live streams, laughing at his jokes, blind to the chilling double meaning in his words. One whispered to another, "We thought he was lonely. We didn't know he was hiding her." But the whisper felt like an accusation aimed at all of them. The cameras returned too. Journalists who once shouted headlines now spoke in softer tones. Documentaries were already being pitched, the story packaged for screens far away. For the media, this was a tragedy. Yes, but also content. Another chapter in the endless stream of true crime. Hye-jin's father rejected every request for an interview. To him, no lens could capture what was stolen. He stood at the graveside, hands shaking as he shoveled the first mound of earth onto the coffin. "Rest, my daughter. No one can silence you now." Inside the prison, Choi Min-soo lived behind bars, but his name continued to echo outside. Some called him a monster. Others, disturbingly, called him a dark entertainer, obsessed with the irony of his live stream jokes. A small morbid following even gathered online, dissecting his old clips frame by frame. The blurred line between victim and spectacle haunted Suzhou. Detective Kang, who had cracked the case, spoke privately months later. His voice carried both pride and unease. "We solved the crime. We put him away. But every time I close my eyes, I hear that refrigerator door opening. I wonder how many others are still closed, still hiding secrets." His words captured the lingering chill. Justice in law, perhaps. Justice in truth, never complete. Cinematically, the story widened here. News crews filmed the Suzhou skyline at dusk, neon lights flickering against the river, while voiceovers recounted the case. The city had become synonymous with the refrigerator murder, its reputation scarred. Children walking home from school whispered warnings to each other. Don't trust a smile. Don't trust a joke. Urban legends formed, transforming a real crime into a cautionary tale. At Heejin's grave, a single candle flickered in the night breeze. Her mother often returned alone, sitting cross-legged by the headstone, speaking, softly, as if her daughter could still hear. You wanted to leave him, start fresh. You were so close. I'm sorry we didn't see the danger sooner. Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking, her words carried away into the silence of the hills. For the city, life moved forward. For the family, time stood still. They carried both love and regret, the cruel reminder that even in the most ordinary homes, horror can bloom unseen. The final narration sealed the story like a tombstone inscription. The Suzhou refrigerator murder was more than a crime. It was a mirror held up to a society too willing to laugh at cruelty, too slow to question silence. 15 months of deceit ended with a body in a freezer, but the questions it left behind remained frozen in time. Was justice served, or was another life erased, another voice buried, in the name of power, performance, and pride? The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of wind rattling an empty refrigerator door, swinging open and shut,